in general, the state of play is that we're seeing three large trends in terms of kids' privacy and protection on the internet. Um, so the first is just a bright line ban. So this is what we saw with like Australia. Just some regulators are throwing their hands up and say, we're done with this. We just want to ban all social media or all services. This can either be a full-on ban for a platform or a service, or it could be on certain types of content. So like a ban on loot boxes or a ban on targeted advertising. So that's actually the second model. So the first model is block the entire platform. The second model is just block certain content or risky features or things within that platform. So it's like platform level or sort of content or feature level access regulation. And then the third one is we're still seeing quite a lot of, even in jurisdictions where there isn't specific legislation passed um, that says you have to block this feature or turn off this feature or get parental consent for this feature. We're still seeing just a lot of regulatory activity when it comes to just existing unfair, deceptive, consumer protection law. So, for example, the Genshin Impact case that Luke mentioned that started off the year was not relying on any particular new law or bill that was passed around loot boxes. It was just saying, hey, we actually think that it's unfair and just generally not okay to be having loot boxes in games without parental consent if you're under 16. So that sort of regulatory backstop is still really important because that's actually still a very big driver of enforcement, um, both at the regulatory level and in terms of like private class actions. There's these lawsuits against social media just saying, in general, we don't think that they're safe for kids or that they're harming kids, and that is legally actionable. So put all of that together, and we're just at a spot where kids' privacy, consumer protection on the internet is just absolutely white hot in terms of interest and essentially risk to business. So the first is just enforcement compression. As I'll go into, there are just a lot of laws, and the amount of sort of grace period between the law going into effect and how quickly you have to comply is getting shorter and shorter because there's just an expectation that you should have done this already. Meanwhile, like the scope is expanding too. 10 years ago, it was a relatively simple, these are the things that you need to get verifiable parental consent for. These are the sort of risks that we're worried about. But regulators are expanding the things that they want kids to be protected from. So, expanding into new verticals, expanding into new types of content that we're afraid of. Again, increasing the number of features and things that the law covers. And then finally is, the reason that this is creating such pressure for the industry is it's really becoming a gate to a a, a global launch. If you don't comply with these laws, you can actually be completely blocked from key markets where there are a lot of users. Um, and we're seeing that, for example, in Australia, where they just flat out ban certain social media companies from operating, and you have some companies that are pulling out of these markets entirely because of these regulatory risks. So it really becomes a critical business issue and not just a legal compliance issue. So the scope expansion. So it's not just social media. I mentioned before, there's a whole bunch of different things that the law is now trying to regulate whether it's loot boxes and in-app purchases, targeted ads and ad profiling, the use of children's data in algorithms for personalization of content, nudge techniques, um, social interactions, and then finally on the right here is AI. There's just a lot of AI specific concerns and laws being passed around kids' engagement and interactions with artificial uh, intelligence. And that just, these are also the, things that run business, and so making sure that these features are compliant with these laws is very on. By the end of 2026, what we expect is that age assurance is going to be kind of the law of the land. I know it's very controversial right now, and there's lots of discussions about how to make it more feasible and better and more privacy preserving. But we don't think these age assurance requirements are going to go away. We think that the regulators find them to be important. Uh, the regulators think that having a reliable indicator of age is important when you're trying to protect kids on the internet. Um, obviously there will be improvements and innovations in the field, but we don't think we're going back to self-declared age gates anytime soon. And we think that there was still going to be quite a lot of enforcement, particularly as these laws go into effect. And also, as the industry has shown that it is possible to do age verification and age assurance at scale, the excuse of, oh, it can't be done is going to it's not going to be as viable anymore. So we're expecting that enforcement will continue to be a big driver of adoption of these technologies.